Hey, welcome back, PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Niccolls here. Jordan and I are on a beautiful road trip through Southern Alberta to play with the brand new Rollei 35AF from Mint. Let's go on an analog adventure. Jordan wants me to start this by saying that we are now rollaying instead of rolling. That's his joke, not mine. I'm so sorry. So, we have this exciting new analog Rollei 35AF to play with. This is a brand new camera made and modeled off of the Rollei 35. But let's say you want to get one of those classic Rollei 35s, maybe the S or the T. Well, you can do that on KH.com. And these are old cameras. They've been around for many, many decades. If you buy it privately, you don't know if it's been exercised, if it's been taken care of. Maybe it's been sitting in a closet getting moldy for years. Who knows? But if you buy it from KH.com, you know that their experts have checked over the camera, made sure everything's working, everything's operating, and then they're going to give you an accurate condition rating on that camera so you know exactly what your money's getting spent on. KH.com is really the best way to take out all the stress and anxiety of buying used gear privately where you never know what you're going to get. So go find that old Rollei, you know it's going to be in good shape. It's on KH.com waiting for you right now. That is why KH is PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. All right, let's get back to the Rollei 35AF. Now, before we get started, I'd also like to disclose that Mint actually sent us this camera. I mean, they just sent it and said, you guys keep it, we don't want it back afterwards, but we don't really have any reason to hold on to it. So we're gonna pay it forward, send it to some other creators who haven't had an opportunity to play with it yet. And so yeah, I'm gonna review it, they can review it, I'm gonna say whatever I want to say about it. I have no reason not to. So let's go now, load this up with film and play with it. Okay, so looking at the Rollei 35AF, of course, it is absolutely adorable, but it owes its good looks and design to actually a classic Rollei camera made in 1966. At the time when the first Rollei 35 came out, it was the world's smallest 35mm camera. Really a groundbreaking design, beautiful and compact. And Mint has actually done a really good job building this particular Rollei 35AF to mimic that same kind of look and feel. It's quite amazing. With the exception of the LiDAR autofocusing unit, they've basically built everything themselves. So that's quite an achievement just on its own. But this body is quite a bit lighter to carry around. So those original Rollei cameras were sort of in the 330 to 350 gram kind of range. This is more 242 grams, eighth of a knock. So it does feel quite a bit lighter in the hand. And I do feel like a heavier weight maybe implies a little bit more of a quality feel, but everything here on the fit and finish is pretty decent. They are actually technically slightly larger physically than the older Rollei cameras, but I still feel that they're adorable and they're easy to carry around, very portable. They use a very similar control dial structure here with the dials right on the front of the camera body. And I mean, it's unique, but you get used to it and actually makes good use of the limited real estate that we have here. Thumb winder on your left hand, that's, the opposite of what most cameras would do, but it works and you get used to it. Now for the lens, the original cameras had a collapsible lens design. You'd actually have to click it out, uncollapse it, lock it in place. This one, it's fixed in place. It's got these little plastic grips on here, but it's just for show. I already tried to, really hard. I tried to unscrew it. It doesn't actually work. Also, the lens here is slightly different. The originals were 40mm lenses. This is a 35mm f2.8. I get it. I'd prefer the 40mm, but I get it. But hopefully it'll be sharp. We'll see when we get our film back there. But what it doesn't have is any sort of filter thread. And that kind of seems like a strange oversight to me, especially because the metering is actually done through the lens. So any filters on there would get metered appropriately. So I would have liked to have seen that built in there. Just plastic threads would have been better than nothing. but this does autofocus, and that's really the main difference. Uses laser beams here on the front to autofocus. Very cool, because the original cameras, it was completely manual focusing and there was no assistance, no rangefinder, nothing like that. So you just have to either guess the distance accurately or do a lot of zone focusing with, more depth of field, just kind of rough zones of focus. And that's a really hard learning curve for people to get into it. So this should be way easier for anybody who wants to pick this up and start shooting analog. Okay, so now we're driving to our next location here. Let's talk about the command dials on the front of this camera. So the first one here on the right, this is our aperture. This lets me set the aperture from anywhere like f16 to f2.8. There's a little lever I can push if I want it to have a more smooth turn, but otherwise it's got pretty gentle click stops. As well, there's a little setting here, and this tells the camera how many exposures the roll of film is inside here. So if I load a 36 exposure roll of film, I just have to make sure I set that there, and then the display on top will actually remind me of how many shots I've taken so far. On the left-hand side, this is our shutter speed and metering. This is pretty cool. So first off, I can go from 500th of a second down to 1 second using the timed shutter. I can then do this long time, it's LT setting. That'll let me actually go for as long as a minute of exposure time if I want. So that's pretty cool if I'm going to do tripod work. And then I've also got my automatic aperture priority setting for metering. This is pretty clever. I've got an A setting in the middle. That's 0 change for exposure as the meter sees it. And then I've got -1 and -2 stops, or +1 and +2 stops. This is an aperture priority based system. So whatever aperture I set here on the other dial, it will then match it to the right shutter speed. Now, I'm going to save the exposure talk for later because I really want to see how it worked out for film, but while we're just here on the dials, I do want to point out that the only exposure assistance that you really have with the meter is in this tiny display on top. It will actually tell you either okay, which means that your exposure is decent and matched, or it will show you a plus or minus symbol with sort of a scale to show you just how far off you are from being too overexposed or underexposed. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is pretty handy. Okay, so last things I want to mention here about the body design. This is powered off of a lithium CR2 battery. It just goes right in this little very kind of hard to open container there. There we go. So I've got my little battery compartment there. I've also got a self timer button here. It lights up red so that the self timer is going to go, and I can always turn the camera off to cancel that. And then the viewfinder itself that you're going to compose with, pretty small, but so are the originals. I actually find it quite usable. It's got illuminated frame lines, but even if you're not getting good illumination, like in low light, you can just use the actual frame of the window. They basically match the same composition. Reloading this as well was really cool. I did like that they've kept all the rewind knobs basically the same as original Rolleis. I will say that rewinding film here, it was a pretty tough crank, and so that's a little bit disconcerting. But anyways, changed it all, loading new film. I mean, that part all works very well. I do also want to talk about the shutter mechanism here. We've got a really bright sunny day here. I was shooting some 400 Tri-X. Now I'm shooting 200 color in here. And using these speeds of film on bright sunny days, that 500th of a second maximum shutter can be a little bit limiting because I'm basically right on the edge of overexposing my film. Having this set to f16 at 500th of a second on a bright day like this should give me good exposures, but I do wish that I could screw ND filters into the front of this lens like I talked about, just so I could maybe shoot at a different aperture like f11 or f8 with 400 speed film out on a day like this. And again, I understood that going into this because 500th of a second, that's what the old Rollei shot as well. A lot of classic cameras have that, but yeah, it is still sometimes a little bit limiting, and ND filters would help that a lot. The other thing I want to talk about here, the shutter mechanism itself, actually quite stable. I feel like I can handhold quite well, but I don't like the shutter on this camera. I really don't. It's a half press shutter, so when I press it halfway, it engages the LiDAR autofocus, and I can hear it going off. There you go, you can hear that. Kind of loud. I can hear it. Jordan's hearing it. A little bit distracting. You're not going to get away with that on the street without people hearing. But on top of that, after I do the half press, to do the full press to take the shot, sometimes I feel like you got to really mash your finger in there to get it to take a picture. All right, so as you can see, Jordan and I were heading back on the highway to go home. We've had a fun day with the Rollei 35AF. And overall the experiences have been really fun. Very fun to play with this, cool design, perfect for just like walking around and travel kind of stuff. The only thing that I'm kind of stressed out about is what will the exposures be like, and how is that autofocus working on this? I mean, LiDAR autofocus using laser beams to shoot out, detect distance, focus the lens. We don't see this very
cool.
Yeah, we don't see this very often. So we're going to see what the results are. But all throughout today, I'm just using a combination of sunny 16 rule or trusting the meter, but trying to make compensations. You know, if I've got a bright window shot, for example, overexposing a little bit to try to compensate for the meter, maybe thinking it's too bright and going dark, and then the shadows inside being really black. We'll see how it all works out. We're gonna get our film developed. We see you soon next. We'll have those results, see what the lens is like. Should be good. Rollei, 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 Rollei.
Hey!
All right, so we've got some film developed. You know, we had a really nice time shooting the camera. Now I want to talk about my experience with the results and the camera itself. And I want to preface this part of the conversation just to give you guys context. I'm going to complain about some things here on the Rollei 35AF. There are some issues that I do have with it, and I did contact Mint to talk to them as well about these issues. And generally the state of it is this: the camera does have some problems for sure, and a lot of this is going to be corrected either in versions coming forward, or, you know, if anybody is getting the early versions with warranty repair. Mint does seem dedicated to trying to fix a lot of this stuff. They do recognize that there's some issues here, but I'm going to point them out anyways because this is the experience that I have with this camera. I have to say that the Mint 35AF on the outside, I think they've done a great job. It does look very stylish, it's very beautiful, and it does feel good in hand. And I do love how they've mimicked a lot of the controls, like the film loading, the rewinding, and the thumb winder. But at the same time, this camera does not have the solid feel of an original Rollei 35. And I mean, the mechanisms inside, it does feel kind of like a Kickstarter prototype camera. These dials do work, but they do feel plasticky. I don't know how well they're gonna hold up over a lot of use. I do like the on-off switch. I especially like the fact that we do have an ISO setting, not only as a reminder, but so you can change the ISO setting yourself. And that's important because with color film, and certainly with black and white, we'll often shoot at a higher or lower ISO than the actual stated amount on the box, because we intend to develop it for that change in exposure. But also I use the Rollei 25 ISO black and white film. When I put it in the camera here, it reads as ISO 100. I mean, that is pretty common with 25 ISO films DX coded. So I had to make sure that I go into the ISO setting and change it to 25, so it's gonna meter properly. This is stuff that, you know, if you're paying attention, you'll find, but if a beginner picked this up and started messing around, there's gonna be a learning curve there. My biggest complaint though here was the shutter mechanism. It's not very well designed. So it's meant to do a lot of functionality. There's a half press to engage the meter and to start the LiDAR autofocus. And then when you push all the way, there's a point where it's going to disengage the thumb wind mechanism and then hopefully actually take a picture like it did there. Now I can wind. But I noticed there's sometimes where it would just kind of get stuck down. It would trigger the release, the thumb winder, but it wouldn't actually take a photo. So I had some wasted frames there. And I mean, again, Mint have recognized this. They say that it's a problem in their first cameras and that hopefully they're gonna address it later on. Now this little top display here, I'm kind of mixed on this. I mean, it's actually quite visible, more than I thought so, considering how small it is. You could see it in low light, you could see it on bright days, that wasn't bad. But I still have to take my eye away from the viewfinder, look up here, see what my exposure settings are, make sure I'm pointing the camera at the same subject. You know, this doesn't do any good, and then go back to shooting, and that slows me down. I would have liked to have had some LEDs inside the EVF that would give me that indication, but I don't get that. And there's some other issues too, and again, hopefully they're gonna fix this, but when I go to the auto setting, for zero exposure change, it would say auto +2 all the time. I know this is a basic bug. That's something you need to fix later on, but just stuff like that was kind of disconcerting and took me out of the experience. And so this is all to say that the Mint 35AF just doesn't feel like a completely finished camera. It lacks some refinement, and I hope that gets addressed in the future. But let's get to the actual results that we got here. So the first thing I want to say, I shot 2 rolls of black and white, love the results. I shot some of that Harman Phoenix 200, and that was a mistake. I didn't know about the experimental nature of that Phoenix 200 film. The colors come out wonky. It's a very strange film, probably the worst one I could choose for this. I'd never used it before. I was just like, oh, that looks cool. Lesson learned, but I still got enough results that I think I can talk about the results I got here. The lens itself, I like it. Actually very sharp, very decent, even wide open. I was happy with the results I was getting there. There were some issues where I would kind of get a little bit of an internal reflection or flare. Again, I don't know if that's the lens. I don't know if that's the baffling inside. it's something that I can't really reproduce easily, so I would say that's probably something to watch out for, but I don't know exactly what's causing that. What I can say is that the metering was surprisingly good. I think this is a really big benefit for somebody who might just be starting out with analog. It takes a lot of the guesswork away. Even in tricky lighting situations, I was quite impressed with it. There were still some situations, as you can see here, where I've got, bright window outside and dark shadows inside, dynamic range nightmare, and it was nice that I could take a little bit of control just to maybe overexpose, expecting that bright window to push my exposure down really deep and then bring up some of those shadows again. And so, if you have experience using maybe more of a center weighted kind of camera, this will come in really handy. But that being said, most of the time, the camera did a great job of exposing well within the dynamic range limits of the film. And so I think that's a big positive. I do also like that I have manual control. That was really nice to use. I could just force a specific shutter speed, force a specific aperture, and the camera would do a really nice job. The other interesting thing was the autofocus, the LiDAR. It's a little bit slow to engage, but honestly, when you're shooting the camera, just the overall experience, I'm not really shooting a lot of sports and stuff, and for street, I found it fast enough. That LiDAR autofocus is definitely set to focus in the center of the image, and it's nice they give you this little circle in the middle so you can frame that up. As you can see here, it will go to whatever's in the center, even if subjects are closer on the side. So if you do want to adjust for that, just make sure that you point the camera at your subject, touch halfway, recompose, and that'll work very well. As for the viewfinder itself, I actually found that it composed fairly accurately. It's not exact, but I expect that on this, but it was pretty close. There's some situations like you can see the buildings here chopped off at the top, but with a little bit of practice, I think you'll get used to that. So, some of the stuff that really matters does work here very effectively. It's really just the lack of refinement that needs to be addressed here. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. Really, who is this camera for? I mean, the beauty of this is exactly the same as the original Rollei 35s, and that is that you're getting a full 35mm negative frame in a very compact package. But this camera is pricey. Yes, it's a new build and there's some merit to that, but again, I don't know how rugged this is going to be compared to a classic camera. I feel like a classic camera might stand up to more abuse, and you do have a lot of options there that are going to be maybe even a little bit less money. If you want a compact little camera that shoots 35mm that you can carry with you, you could certainly look at a lot of the Olympus XA models. Those are adorable, they're cute, some even have manual control. You could even look at one of the Rollei 35 film cameras that this is based off of. There's a whole range of prices there. I mean, it really depends on the model, the lens that it has, how advanced the features were, but a lot of those are going to be around half the price of something like this, if not less. Or if you want a premium film camera that's going to be similar price point to this and very capable, you could look at something like a Ricoh GR21, for example. Now, if you are trying to get into analog and you're looking for a brand new camera that's going to give you that 35mm experience, you could certainly look at the Pentax 17. And again, it does lack the manual controls that this has. It is physically larger, although not by that much. Most importantly, it shoots half frames, so your quality is not going to be as good, although you do get more shots per roll of film, so that brings your cost down a little bit. The Pentax 17, though, it was a fun experience. I think it is good for beginners. It's got some quirks, but to be honest, it was quite reliable and very easy to get into without too many surprises. Whereas this camera here, I think it has more potential to be good for an advanced photographer who already knows what they're doing and has experience, or somebody who just absolutely wants to have the design of this. I do get that they're absolutely gorgeous. I, for one, am very intrigued by it. I just absolutely want to see later versions that maybe have more refinement. It might be even more compelling at that point. But leave your comments below. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinion on it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and this little look at the new mint Rollei 35AF. Definitely check out the podcast as well. It's on this exact same channel or all your favorite podcasting apps. Just search for PetaPixel Podcast. Store.petapixel.com. That's where you want to head for all our merch. And otherwise, we really appreciate you guys joining us again for another episode. We'll see you soon.